Welcome to the TufFish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Jenn Bouchard. Jenn, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Jen. This is great. I'm so excited about this.
Oh, me too. Me too. Having another fellow Jenn on the show. This is super cool.
Absolutely.
So, would you please start by telling people, sharing with me, like, how'd you get into writing?
Oh gosh. So I've been teaching high school social studies for 22 years and still teaching full time. And I also am a volunteer for the college that I went to, for Bates College in Lewiston, Maine. And I was the president of the Alumni Association for 2 years. It was an all-encompassing, absolutely fantastic volunteer leadership experience. I loved it. I got to meet people from all these decades, all these graduates who I never would have come across in any other way if I hadn't been doing this, but it took a ton of my time, but I loved it. And when it was over, you just sort of drop into, there's nothing else really going on with this. And I had this hole in my life. And I mean, people were like, well, what are you talking about? You've got two little kids. And at the time they were 3 and 7. And, you're teaching, you've got so much going on, you can't be bored. And I'm like, well, there's something else. I just need to do something else. And I started kind of playing around with the idea and it came out of nowhere. I hadn't written anything fiction wise since I was in middle school, I think. And I said to my husband one day, we were at the beach, and I said, I think I want to try to write a novel. And he was like, all right, And so one of the things that we did was he and I started, mostly me, but he'd come with me sometimes. We started listening to and going to, when we could, interviews with other authors and just kind of hearing a little bit about their journeys to publication and what's happened since then. And that was really helpful. And I was like, you know what? If I still want to do this now after listening to these stories, I think I need to give it a try. So that's sort of how it all started.
So, I love that though, because I mean, to me, it showed an interest not just in the outcome, the book itself, but also what it took to get there. And
Right.
I love that because there was an appreciation then for, okay, well, what else do I need to do? So would you unpack that a little bit more? What type of things did you learn that helped you to get started? So you make the decision, I'm doing this. What did you implement? What did you start to do?
Well, I just started coming up with ideas like any of us do, and coming up with characters and coming up with, I'm definitely a plotter, not a pantser. For those in the writing world, you know what that means. But I don't stick necessarily to all of the plot aspects that I plan out ahead of time. I'm open to change, and so I started coming up with this kind of loose outline, started coming up with characters, and started drafting. And like I said, I had really no idea what I was doing. I wasn't really reading books on craft. I was just sort of listening to authors and what they had to say, what they thought made a good story. Um, and it took me 2.5 years to write my first draft because I was, teaching full time. The kids were young. And so I mostly was writing in the summers when they were in day camp and I wasn't teaching. A little bit here and there on some breaks and holidays and things like that. But it took me a long time. And it's not even that long of a book. And so when I got to that end point of 2.5 years, I was like, all right, now what? And I started editing it on my own. Once again, not really know what I was doing. And that took me, gosh, close to a year. And then I did go to a seminar at Grub Street, which is a writing center in Boston, kind of about, how do you approach the next step, the querying and all that sort of thing. And I really liked the instructor of the seminar. And so I ended up hiring her to look at my query letter and the first 4 chapters of my book. And she also said, she goes, do you have, because I didn't know any writers at that time. I really wasn't in the world of writing that I am now. And she said, do you have anyone who you could give this to who would, for free, look at it, who you would trust their opinion? And I said, my friend Stephanie is an English teacher. We've been friends since we were in high school, and she would do this. She'd be great at it. She's a voracious reader. And since then, Stephanie's read everything that I've written, which has been really helpful.
So what I hear you basically talking about is finding a beta reader.
Yes.
And Stephanie being not just your friend, but it's and also not just someone who enjoys reading, but it sounds like she also enjoys reading the genre that you're
Yes.
that you wrote.
She's
Because
got a good eye too. She's really, she is, because I've written some short stories that I've had published too since this time. And she's always really good at kind of honing in on things and, what do you really want to accomplish here? And what do you think the character, what's their motivation here? And she's able to help me see things that I can't see on my own.
I love how you say that, because that is I've heard it said before, but one of my clients, but also just in general, where it takes a village to kind of bring a book to life, to put this together. And it's a village of not just the writer doing it or an editor, but it could be a couple of editors. It could be your illustrator, your designer, your cover, your formatter, if you're doing a publisher type of thing, like how you're getting it published, beta readers, all of those. Every person involved is definitely someone who is helping, who is adding value to this book, so that it really is an amazing piece when it hits the bookshelf and it's something you're talking about and sharing. So I love that you did that. When you were talking with Stephanie about when she would read for you, did you have questions that you would ask her, like, this is, could you read and from this angle and give me this type of feedback? So getting specific, like, I'm trying to understand this, if it's working or not, or just in general, what's your feeling? And do you really like it? Do you think it needs more? Do you think this is boring, or what have you? Like, how did you guide that?
I don't think I knew as much of what questions to ask with the first book. With the stories, because she's now read, I've written 5 short stories. I was kind of writing in between, when I was finished with the book and when it got published, and 4 of them were published and we're still waiting on a 5th. But, I think I've gotten better at what questions to ask her. I'm able to say now, like, I don't know if this really works here. She's able, I had this one story I wrote where, there's all these students in a classroom initially, and I should know this, I'm a teacher. She's like, why aren't they all pulling out their phones at this point? I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, of course they would. And so I think she's, sometimes I think I write probably too idealistically, and she will bring that dose of reality into the scene for me, which is oftentimes what I need. It's going to be interesting. So I finished drafting another novel. I just finished it in December, and so I'm letting it sit for a few weeks, and I'm about to, hopefully this weekend, start diving into going through it myself first, and then she's going to take it. And so I'm really thinking about what kinds of things I want to ask her to look for. So, and I don't know what those are yet. I think I need to go through it once, in completion. It's actually sitting on that counter right behind me. And so I need to go through it once before I give it to her, and just make sure that I'm ready to ask those questions.
I love that. Okay, so you've shared a few different pieces here that I want to touch on. One of which is the fact that you took a break. You've written another piece, and there is a clear break between finishing that version before you go back through again. And I think that is so important, because if you are constantly in and looking and just not taking that break, you're going to miss things. You're too attached and you're too involved. And it doesn't matter what that is. I mean, even an email or a blog post.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah. And as a writer, but also as an editor, I do the same things. Like, I will work on a piece, but then I take steps back and I say, like, I'm going to come back to that before I send it back to a client, or before I take my next step with it, because that space helps you to see more, and you're processing. Your mind is still going while you're still thinking about, while you're
all the time. I keep thinking about it,
yes,
which is good, and I think I know that there are some things that I want to do. I read something recently about revisions and about thinking about senses when you're revising, thinking about what do things look like? What do they smell like? What do they taste like? What do they sound like? And I think that some of those things might be missing right now, especially because I write a lot about food, and I don't want the food just sort of thrown in there. I want it to be more of a sensory experience. And so I'm going to focus on that.
Excellent. Yeah, I was thinking the very same things. You're getting into showing and telling, where I can tell you that we're going to have this incredible dinner it's been lovingly put together, and I could tell you that it's salad and pasta, and hey, we're done.
Yeah.
Or I could tell you how the salad actually looks and how it tastes with the right dressing, or with that pasta dish. Well, was it some kind of spaghetti, sauce, or was it more of a stuffed shell type of thing? And
Right.
what type of sauces were used? Like, and what does it taste like going down? I mean, like, all of those things are create that experience, and it doesn't, there's a balance of how much to show and how much to tell, but still, that you're right, that draws the reader in. It makes it feel more like they're sitting with those characters versus just watching and going, oh, they're over there in this restaurant, like across the street type of thing.
Right, definitely, and that was one of the greatest compliments I got from writing first course from my readers. Was many of them said that the book made them hungry, and I think that should always be our goal when when we're writing a lot about food.
Well, in general, I mean, when you're reading, you want your readers hungry to say, oh my gosh, that was great. When are you writing again? Or when's the next book coming out? Or, oh my gosh, I have to wait that long, kind of thing, because that actually is such a great feeling when you see, like, hey, when do you have another book coming out? Because they're hungry for more. And I
Definitely.
mean, when you have food in it, hello, I mean, that's awesome. So would you talk about First Course? I love the name. How did you come up with it?
Most most things come to me when I'm doing laundry, and this seems to be something I talk about a lot in interviews is doing laundry. But for whatever reason, both of my book titles came to me that way, and I think that the book is so much about second acts in life. Um, and there's so much about food in it, and the main character enjoys making like small plates, like appetizers and things like that. That's like really her go-to. And so all of a sudden I was like, oh, it's first course, because everything up to this point has been the first course, and now we're going to move into our second act of life. So that's how I came up with it.
I think that's so
Little play on
precious.
words.
I think that's so precious. I love that so much. So I see the book is behind you, and I love the cover too. I think that that's really eye-catching. It's really, it just tells you a lot about the book, with it being an apron, with it being, there's food, that's happening, and it looks light, but yet, you know, something that would be enjoyable on the palate, if you will. So we're going to have a lot of food puns already. I can just feel this
Absolutely.
though. So how did that come about then? What helped you
Cover.
to, yeah.
Yeah, I did have a lot of input in my cover design with my publisher, which was fantastic. And they had asked me for some ideas, and can you look around for some things that might be interesting, and gave me some websites to use. And we came up with some ideas initially that just, I don't know, like my husband and I were looking at them, we're like, I don't know if this really portrays what the book is. And then I think it was my husband who was like, well, can you see if they've got an apron? And so they did. The designer pulled this out, and then we had some different things with the apron, and I actually put out a few different options to some of my really good friends, and I just had them anonymously vote. And then of course it was tied. So I think there was like a three-way tie between, three of the five designs. And they're like, oh, okay, I'm just going to have to make a decision myself. And something just told me, the apron is going to be eye-catching. It's not going to be too busy. It will stand out on a shelf. And that's, something that also really appealed to me. That it was important that it was bright and bold. It is, I love bright pinks, and it's been really fun to use this color in promotion as well. So I even got a bright pink dress for my launch party. So that's been really fun too. But you're right, like having the apron and just being able to play up the cooking aspects been super fun. I got spatulas made that I've been using as some swag at events, and things along the recipe cards from the biscuit recipe in the book. We've been doing a lot of things with the cooking aspect.
So you have touched on something that I think is so important, which is branding. and the branding element of not just this book, but also the business.
Yes.
You're talking about it in this is a business.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so by talking about, I love the idea of the pink dress. I think that sounds awesome. I'm sure you rock it because I'm a big fan of pink too. Hello, it's an awesome color.
It
And and but I love the spatula idea and the recipe cards because to your point, it's playing off of it, but it's aligning to a brand. So how does that feel to you when the sense that you're right, you have a second book, a second manuscript that you've got in the corner over there. So how does that book fit into this bigger picture and blending all of that together?
That's a great question. The first book was set in coastal Maine. I think, I'm a coastal person. Like, this is something that's going to be part of my brand. Sometimes we can take little side trips. First course started in Chicago. I think that, the book I'm going to be starting this year, I think we'll take a little side trip to Phoenix at some point. The book I just finished went up to Burlington, Vermont for a little bit, but for the most part, these are coastal books. That's who I am. That's my brand. And once again, foodie fiction. With the strong coastal element to it. So yeah, I think that that's something I'm going to be continuing to be drawn to. I think just naturally in my writing. I got for this book that I just finished writing. It's set on Cape Cod, and we've spent a lot of time there as a family over the past 8 years or so. But this summer in particular, we always spend a whole week there in August, but we got to go a few other times this year. With the pandemic, it's about an hour and a half away, and it's been a little bit of a place to go to when we can go somewhere else, and we've still been able to stay close that way. And I've just spent a lot of time like on that beach that I am setting, where I set the story, and just kind of immersing myself in that setting, paying a lot of attention to the houses that are there. I picked out the house of one of the characters, and that's where he lives. And being able to really call upon a lot of local businesses, and people really liked that in first course. People who had spent time in Maine in particular really liked reading about places where they had been before and places that were familiar with that to them. I write about a car trip about an hour and a half north from Portland, Maine, up to the Camden Rockport area. And there was one time where my husband was driving and I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and I'm taking notes the whole way on this drive. Because I wanted to make sure I really got it right. And I wanted to include all the bridges. You go over all these little bridges. Well, there are like a dozen bridges. And I'm just another bridge. But I wanted to, be authentic to where I was. And I got to do an event. It's been hard to do events, as you can imagine, but we've been able to do some. And I did do one in Bath, Maine this fall at a cookware store, which also goes into the branding, which is super fun. And people also mentioned that they liked the idea that, there was so much familiarity for them. And I think too, even if you're not familiar with coastal New England, I always like reading stories about places and reading more about those locations. So I think that that's also appealing in different ways.
Yeah, I love that. I love that a lot because, what I also picked up on what you were saying was that the fact that you had a book signing, and I get with the pandemic, but the logic behind having a book signing, not always in a bookstore, but when it makes sense, is spot on. I love that you had it in a cooking place or in a foodie place, because when I would do a lot of book signings earlier, when I was first releasing children's books, I would pick places that weren't always the bookstore. I'd pick cafes or bakeries, because bakeries to me were fun. Little ones would be in there. It was a family type space or a chocolatier type of place. And being a foodie myself, I was always like, look at this, how amazing this piece of chocolate goes so nicely, or this cupcake goes so nicely with this book. So
Definitely.
I love the idea that you were picking different places, thinking out of the box, really, to meet with people, but yet it was still connected. I love that.
So there's a scene in the book in a bakery cafe in Concord, Massachusetts, and I actually did a signing there as well. So and they
Love
were
it.
thrilled that I included their location in the book. So you're absolutely right. There's lots of different things to do. I did one outside of the general store of a local farm. I've been all over the place.
I love that so much. So when you were working on first course, what what helped to inspire the characters themselves?
So the main character is 24, and so she is 20 years younger than I am right now. And so I was really thinking a lot about what it was like to be 24, and where your head is at, and the decisions you make. And sometimes they're not great decisions, and sometimes they're better than others. But also, that was around the time where I really started to get into cooking, and so I was thinking a lot about what kinds of things would I make for friends, for family, um, and what kind of a role that played in my life. And so I was thinking a lot about that in terms of the main character. So that was fun. In terms of the other characters, I was trying to make sure that they were complex enough, that they were kind of multifaceted, that they had some flaws, they had some journeys that they needed to take to work on themselves a bit, but that they also needed to figure out who they were and what they're kind of, because all of the characters are sort of embarking on this what's my next act in life, and it looks different for everyone.
I love that. I love that so much, because you're right. There needs to be the complexity. There needs to be the challenges. I call them happy developmental programs. And, with little air quotes around that, because it might not always be happy for them. It really shouldn't be, but it's not always easy for us just in real life to
Absolutely.
go through something, but you have that opportunity to make a challenging situation either work for you and you be better for it and see it as there was something good that came from it, or not. And that's what we can also show and do within books. So I love that you talked about that. Yeah.
Totally. Absolutely. I those are the kinds of books I enjoy reading myself. So I think that was also what was kind of in my head. Like, what would I want as a reader?
Yeah. So with book 2 that you have, is it part of a series? So are we,
Oh,
no. So first course is, we're not having another course.
no, there's no more courses. No more courses. I think they're on their own now. So yeah, I know. And so that was fun, because I got to think about, this whole new cast of characters, and a different protagonist, who's on the verge of turning 40. So I got to get kind of into a different mindset there.
Yeah.
And, definitely it's a multi-generational. There's people who are, in their 60s. There's people who are in their 20s and 30s in the book. And so just kind of, playing into all of that as well was really fun. I think I just knew so much more of what I was doing this time, which was helpful. But when I drew out all these characters before I started drafting and came up with all these descriptions, it's amazing, because I'm sure you know this. Some characters you think you're going to include end up never showing up. Others take on a whole different, kind of take on a different path, a different persona. They become more important than you think they will. And so that was really fun too, to just kind of let my characters become who they became.
I love that. Yeah, I've had it for my own writing, where you feel like, where all of a sudden this character that you thought was going to be in a supportive role has decided to show up a little bit stronger. And then you're like, well, okay, then let's figure out what to do with you. And I've even had an interview with someone where she talked about how she had written the story. She had this character intentionally as a throwaway character, knowing this is what's going to happen. And this character was like, I don't think so.
They tell you, they let you know.
Yes. In fact, this was something that's come up on a couple of the episodes, where there's a movie called The Man Who Invented Christmas. And it's how It's basically based upon Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol. And there is a scene in there in particular where he is sitting in his office writing space, and you see them scanning the room from his vantage point, and all of his characters are looking at him kind of like, dude, when are you going to get on with it and write your story? Because we're waiting. And you can
Oh,
just
that's
feel
too
them
funny.
like kind of pushing back. And there's a scene in there where Scrooge is actually coming over to Dickens like, I don't think you're representing me very fairly. So I've taken the liberty of trying to share some stuff with you, and maybe you should consider it. But it makes you laugh, exactly, because as a writer, you're sitting there going, that's happened. So it's like,
Absolutely. Without a doubt. And that certainly happened this time. But so I'm anxious to read through it now and just to see if it all makes sense.
yeah.
But at the time, I have to tell you, I haven't written anything where I was so happy writing it before. I was seriously smiling the whole time I wrote this book.
Oh, I love it.
So it's got to mean something, right? It's got to be a good sign. So I'm going to take it as that.
Yes, I love that. I love that. I love that it's separate from your first book. I love the enthusiasm you have for the characters, because you're right. There is that joy. It doesn't mean that it doesn't get challenging at times.
Right. I know it's going to get tough. I mean, I know the next few months will be challenging, especially, putting it out there in the world again.
Yeah, but still, the fact that you have so much joy about it right now, I mean, and you've written the draft, that it's ready for more to come through, but still, I love that. You need that enthusiasm, even when it's frustrating, and it will at some point, but
Definitely.
The fact that you're sitting here going, yes, I'm excited. I can't wait to read it. What can you share its name?
It's called Palms on the Cape.
Love it. Love, love, love it. This has been awesome. And if you want to share when you think Palms on the Cape might come out, by all means. But if it's more appropriate that people jump on your mailing list or follow you in social to hear more about it, by all means. But where can people connect with you, Jenn? And where can they get First Course?
Yes. All right. So if you go to my website, it's jennbouchard.com. So Jenn with 2 N's, Bouchard.com. Everything is there for you, including links. It's available. The book is available anywhere books are sold. You can get it, through anything on bookshop.org. If you have a favorite local indie bookstore, if it's not there, they can order it for you. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target.com, Booksamillion.com, any of those places. So it is available. If you happen to be in the United Kingdom, if you're in the UK, I know they've been running some great sales on Amazon, so check it out. And it's available both in paperback and ebook. But if you go onto jennbouchard.com, you also can join my mailing list. You can also find all my socials. They're all the same. It's at Jenn Bouchard BOS for Boston. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you can find me there. And if you read it and like it, please leave me a review.
Oh, I love it. Jenn, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Jenn.